Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. Even before the most recent spike in food prices, there's been a lot of public anger directed towards Galen Weston of the Loblaws empire. Rightfully so. This is the public face of a giant grocery conglomerate that has admitted to fixing bread prices in Canada for their own gain and is now paying out shareholders record profits while many of us struggle to get the food we need. That focus on the grocery industry, their CEOs, and food insecurity was heightened last week during the Agricultural Committee hearings in Ottawa that featured the three head honchos from Loblaws, Safeway, and Metro. The NDP had been the party most vocal about getting these folks in front of MPs to be questioned, to figuratively face Canadians for the soaring price of food. And they got people watching by hyping up the anticipated appearance and claiming they were going to really give it to these CEOs. There were many of us, I imagine, who would have given anything to grill those oligarchs in front of millions of Canadians. In fact, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, claimed to have over 2,000 questions submitted to his office. And I'm sure we've all seen the social media posts and memes with opinions on this one. But I was really let down. We wanted to see these guys squirm, frankly. I wanted a genuine class analysis laid out by our so-called leaders. But that was too much to ask for, I guess, at least from the NDP. We got some sound bites from the electoral left, but not even good ones. If it were a debate and we were picking winners, it wasn't the working class. The men in suits got up there and repeated their polished statements, crafted by their teams, bragged about their philanthropy, and assured us their profit margins haven't gone up, despite millions of people being priced out of life's most basic necessity. We didn't hear them say, let them eat cake, but we might as well have. There were some moments where MPs got a few jabs in, but at no point did anyone hone in on the systemic issues, namely capitalism, as the actual problem. And very few options were put forth to solve food insecurity. It was all a show. And unfortunately, the wrong people said the right things. So this episode is going to break down what we heard during the hearings, discuss what that means for the state of food prices and Canadian politics. Good morning. Okay, so I have an audio clip I'm going to play for you. It's from the Agricultural Committee hearings that everyone's talking about, right? Where the grocery CEOs are there to answer questions. And this is after they've had their 5 minutes each to basically give this big PR spiel. And this person's up next, okay? You have some context.
You as the CEOs of major grocery chains have an oligopoly with it, only 5 companies controlling 80% of grocery stores in Canada. And you use this power to nickel and dime farmers and wholesalers to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars for many, with fines, chargebacks, and exorbitant fees for the privilege of selling their food to your stores, forcing them to accept contracts where, according to the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, 44% of producers are selling at a loss. And the world is worried about food security right now, and Canada has an abundance of land to grow fresh food to feed the world. But your company's practices of arbitrary fees, fines, and chargebacks are keeping your profits and grocery prices high while single-handedly helping to destroy Canadian family produce farms and businesses. And nowhere else in the world do grocers do this to farmers and producers. Prices are quickly becoming unreachable for roughly 12.5 million Canadians who are earning less than $40,000 a year, forcing them to switch from fresh, healthy food to heavily processed, cheaper, and less nutritious products. And that's not real food, and it's going to lead to an increase in the burden on our healthcare system. Canadians deserve to eat fresh, Canadian-grown fruits and vegetables. And after 8 years under a government that's purposefully implementing taxes and policies that are harmful to Canada's agriculture industry, what your businesses are doing to farmers doesn't give a lot of hope to the average person who's simply looking to eat. So gentlemen, I'd like to ask you, can you look farm families in the eyes right now? Because I know a lot of them are watching right now, and tell them that you're not pushing family produce farms out of business in this country. You, as the CEOs of major grocery chains, have an
All right.
It opens up a lot of questions for me from topics that I'm interested in already. But I don't know a lot about that relationship between farmers and the grocery stores, but based on that, yeah, I mean, obviously something isn't going well, right? Obviously there is somewhere along the process where there is a problem because it does not make sense for food prices to be where they are. And for a country that, I mean, Canada's the second largest country in the world by land mass. I know not all of it is good agriculture land, but a great deal of it is good agriculture land, more than most places in the world. What's going on, you know?
And she brings up the fact that like 12.5 million Canadians are earning under 40K, which is the average, close to what we call the average income. Made a lot of good points, yeah?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, full stop. Who do you think she represents? Like, who did it sound like she was kind of speaking to or for? Like, you heard her, right? She was speaking
Farmers.
to the issues you were interested in, farmers. That's a conservative MP.
Damn.
Yeah, I had this moment this morning, and that really scared me.
Are they a rural conservative MP, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I'm guessing. Leanne Rude. My point is they are speaking to you. They spoke to me. I made a whole TikTok clip out of it, and then I wanted to Google who they were, assuming it was like some farmers co-op representative or national farmers representative or something like that. And I'm going, people are hearing this though, Santiago, and I know what they would actually do. I'm not like thinking, but like that was the only mic drop moment of the entire hearing. That was the only person that really spoke about the relationship to farmers. Everyone else just kept going at it from a consumer capitalist perspective. And like, that's just not hitting the point because it's not Galen Weston's fault that capitalism exists and requires profits to their shareholders. You know, like
This actually like links back to an underlying philosophy of mine, which is that like what is fiscally responsible actually comes from the left. And anybody who like it is reasonable for a conservative to be making these points. They should be making these points. The problem is that conservatives don't usually say these kinds of things. It's because they're all about, you know, like or at least in their messaging, they talk about like fiscal responsibility. Allowing this system to destroy itself is the least fiscally responsible thing that anybody could ever do. So I'd hope that there's at least a few of them out there who kind of get that and who say stuff like this, and they're not all complete hacks. But
I'm in political turmoil here. Not that I'm considering conservatives, and that I am deeply fearful they have perfected the populist rhetoric to a point where they sound like what we need would implement the opposite. We know this. This. But Santiago, like, and she wasn't alone. The other conservative MPs were there to take down giants. Like, they were not kindly. They actually came off a lot more informed on the topic than Jagmeet by far. By far, you know, they talked about the actual issues that were causing profits, where the Liberals and the NDP were just... What happened where the CEOs were able to say, we made our financials public. It's known that we don't actually make our bread and butter, so to speak, off of groceries. We make it off of banking and cosmetics. And so their line of questioning, they did not adapt to that revelation. And they just kept going at it from the how dare you charge profits? How much profit is enough? Profit is too much, too much. Like, they'd already talked those points out. But the cons got up there and they spoke to the issues that we were sitting there and actually going, oh, like, that makes sense. That's how they're making their money, right? They're making it off the backs of farmers too. And they ended up speaking for both low-income people and farmers. And people are going to buy this. She opened the hearing. So that's like the first person that gets to speak to these three folks. And she was the only person that kind of brought up these points. Everyone else had an opportunity to revisit farmers and did not. And it just tied into you calling me earlier this week and talking about how do we get farmers socialists again? And if they are needing that kind of speak and those kinds of policies to address those kinds of needs, like a nationalized grocery chain, then yes, yes, there's room for that then, certainly. But right now, the conservative machine saw that and implemented that before the others. This is not the only time they've tried to appeal to farmers, but they really won this moment here, and it backfired because nobody in the end kind of challenged capitalism. These folks got a huge platform. Each one of these three oligarchs got to speak for 5 minutes uninterrupted and then bleed out their answers to folks. So like they were getting 6 minutes to both ask questions and get their answers. And they would just eat up time. And so to me, these hearings were a disaster for all those reasons. I don't know.
It really shows like that popular opinion that the NDP just does not know how to talk to people outside of urban centers is kind of true, that they're not appealing to rural, to farmers. Their messaging is just not on point there. I mean, they should be dominating that conversation, given that this is an issue of capitalism, given that this is an issue of corporations exploiting people. That is where the NDP should be absolutely ripping people to shreds. And the fact that they're not, the fact that they're letting the Conservatives outflank them, it's a complete embarrassment, And it's conversations that, Canadians really just don't get to hear a lot about agriculture, but we should, because it's a very important part of our economy. It's a very important part of, food is one of those essential goods. We hear a lot about housing. We don't talk about food insecurity, No,
and the label of this was global food insecurity, but obviously we're focused on Canadian stuff.
Let's talk about that for a second, just so we be clear about how much of an issue this is, because food insecurity is something that I've written several articles about. So last year's when I first wrote my first article about food insecurity, the numbers were 4.4 million Canadians. This year when I wrote an updated article about it, it's 5.8 million Canadians who are food insecure.
Okay, what is food insecure? Sometimes we use terminology and we don't really know what it means, but...
Yeah, so inability to acquire, consume an adequate diet, quality or sufficient quantity of food.
Did you have that on screen ready to go?
It's in my article. I'm reading my article.
Good for you. All right.
I pulled it up. But, what makes it really crazy is that it's 1 in 5 households with children. 1/3 of children don't have access to breakfast in the morning. 1/3 of babies in Nova Scotia. I can keep going. It's 66% of people who live on programs such as ODSP, with 30% of them being severely food insecure. It's something like 1/4 of BIPOC households. And don't even get me started on none of it, because none of it is completely being destroyed by food insecurity. I think it's 57% of the population of none of it, and grocery prices there are 3 times higher than the rest of the country. So let's be clear. Food insecurity is a massive crisis in Canada. We talk about inflation, but this is not because of inflation. Food insecurity has been an issue.
Greedflation now, we call it.
Greedflation.
There's a catchy term now to avoid saying capitalism, but sorry.
It's a new term, but food insecurity has been going on for many, many years. In 2012, I think it was. Oh, man, I have to keep scanning May of 2012, a special rapporteur on the right to food from the United Nations visited Canada and found that we were in violation of our human rights obligations with food insecurity. Canada is the only G7 nation without a national school care meal program. We're ranked 37th out of 41 wealthy countries for kids' access to nutritious food. Let me say that one again in case people didn't capture that. We are ranked 37th out of 41 wealthy nations in the world for kids' access to healthy and nutritious food. That is absurd. This idea of Canada the prosperous, of Canada a country that is doing good. Any country that is that low amongst wealthy nations, not amongst wealthy nations, for kids having access to food is one of the biggest failures that somehow we do not talk about almost at all. And we act like this is a new problem. It's not a new problem. It's not a new problem.
No, and you're like talking 2000s and stuff like that. Famine and purposeful famine and food insecurity has been used as a weapon for as long as there's history books, right? This is a tool of the powerful. And we are talking about people that we know fixed bread prices, right? So it's not, and like when we talk about social murder, it's not a failure, right? It's not like, oops.
No.
Or, this was bad policy. Now I realize. They have the tools to make sure this doesn't happen and it continues. So I don't care if those CEOs are standing up there and saying, we don't make our money off of groceries. We make it off of banking and cosmetics. Those are different stories. Like that opens a different can of worms. Is that essentially a pink tax, right? You essentially make it off the backs mostly of women buying cosmetics and then probably low income people in the banking industry that they do through their chains. I don't give a shit. Then send some of that profit over to the groceries because you're starving people, and how it's okay for that guy to sit up in front and talk about how they have all these charities that they, speaking to your children going hungry. They were given a platform yesterday to talk about how many children across Canada that they feed and then get a tax write-off for. And we're sitting going, not we, but most Canadians are going, oh, well, okay, that's pretty good. They're good corporate citizens. And it's like, that is impossible. The fact that we have profitized the need to survive, right? Because how many people can actually grow their own food in the way that we've structured our lives?
Especially in the winter.
Yeah, it's impossible. So we don't need to. But it's so hard for people to think outside that paradigm, right? Like, that, okay, because, Galen sits up there and he says, well, Mr. Singh or however he addresses him, any good business knows that part of the game is, making profits. This is not an exact quote. And it's like, Jagmeet doesn't challenge that point. He is given this opportunity, like, here you go. He's like, well, that's capitalism for you. And the leader of the working class party had nothing really to offer in return, except 2,000 pages that he had printed out beside him that I totally love. I hate giving credit to liberals ever, or cons. Let's be clear. But one liberal MP had a dig. She's like, well, I didn't print out all of the submissions that I got from constituents. I'm a bit of an environmentalist. Oh, and there's Jagmeet sitting beside like reams of paper. And I was just like, literally, they have no messaging game at all. They failed in that moment.
It would take 2 pieces of paper to have enough information that you need to get all the points across.
We need a visual aid, right? Don't worry, they'll recycle it. But, it was all optics. And
it's the problem, though. It's like that point by Galen Weston, right? Well, there you go. It shouldn't be a business because what we're talking about is an essential good, right? The essential goods, housing, food, healthcare, education. These are not places to make money off of. These are things that society needs to function. And they're things that when you provide it for the people, society prospers. It's not somewhere where, like, if we were to nationalize everything regarding food and make sure that every single person in this country was fed, that would not cost us money. It would not. It would make money because society would do better. And, like, with regards to, like, for example, and just because, like, this is something I love talking about, like, let's bring it back to the kids for a second, right? When it comes to a child not having breakfast in the morning, like 1/3 of Canadian children don't because of access to. Well, how does that affect their education? Because somebody who hasn't had enough food in the morning is not going to learn as much. There are countless studies about this. So then that affects the quality of the education that they receive, the memories that they retain from that education. Now, who are the children who are more likely to not have breakfast? Children who come from lower income households. So they're already starting from a disadvantaged position. They're not getting the same quality education as somebody with a higher income. So they're going on to perform less well in school, get into worse programs, and end up in lower paying jobs. And that is how you continue the cycle of poverty. Something as simple as not access to food as a child is a clear example of how that cycle of poverty just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And it's one of those things where it is that cycle of poverty also affects society, because people doing bad and struggling does not help the economy, does not help everyone else. When our fellow people do well, we all do well. That's how you build a functioning society. So by not feeding that child, by not taking responsibility of a society and making sure that every single child in this country is fed, we are screwing ourselves over in the long run. We are screwing ourselves in the process. So we need to do that. And that's the problem, is and that's what I was saying. I mean, like, Galen Weston is taking one hell of a hit for the capitalist team, because all the focus is on him, when this is so much more deeply rooted in what we value in Canada and how we structure our society. We need to do better when it comes to food. Sorry, I'm just going off at this point, but
No, and that's how I felt after watching those hearings. Like, just, it was unbelievable. But I took some points, right, when the first three oligarchs got up there, and you know, it's not a coincidence that they all had very similar talking points. We know they colluded around bread prices. They were just, frankly, I don't think they took a hit, Santiago. I know he's facing a lot of heat, and in the social medias that we watch, like meme crazy, he's not going to feel a pinch of this. And he actually got a really big platform. And it's ironic because they're bringing up all the same issues that we bring up, but in this unironic way. It's not their fault grocery prices are high, right? That's what they say. They blamed, check this out, and I don't get labor shortage. Okay, can of worms. Let me go, and we can go off. War, right? Political unrest or global unrest. I don't know how they worded it, but they mean war. Interest rates and the cost of fuel and every other thing in our life. So in a way, they blamed capitalism for these bread price or whatever, for grocery prices, but with this kind of shrug, like, meh, like, hey, all of these things are wrong. It's not our fault. So bye.
Well, I found it interesting, just speaking on labor shortages. You know, I was looking at a 2021 Census of Agriculture from StatsCan, and I found, so
just by chance,
this morning, as I was doing,
you're on fire.
And there was, I noticed, so there's 189,000 farms in Canada, 226,000 farm operators, and 242 paid employees. That seems like not enough people working per farm. I don't know. Something about that seemed wrong to me. But I did find interesting, because I've looked in the past the fact that, like, the agriculture industry, the average age is like really high. It's somewhere between 55 and 65. I don't know what.
Are you talking about farmers? Because I think it's important to note right here that migrant workers largely labor Canadian farms.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? So,
which is
we rely on temporary.
Thing.
But we rely on the exploitation of temporary foreign workers.
Yes, thank you for rewording that for me. Absolutely.
Yeah, but also the average age of people who work on farms is like getting really, really high up there, right? And so our agriculture industry is crumbling, and what has anybody done to solve that problem? You know, I have some solutions in mind, if you were to ask me.
Well, we are.
So for example, one thing, Canada is a country that, we have our brutal winters. You cannot grow, you can grow some things, but you can almost exclusively not grow in the winter. That's a lot of months that we're just dismissing, right? I have been advocating for a while for a move towards renewably powered vertical greenhouses closer to urban centers. Why is that something that I'm bringing up? Because we're looking right now with climate change at a future of more and more food insecurity, more and more food scarcity, and we need to start taking more advanced steps to tackle that. So with vertical greenhouses, you get 200% more yield, you use 90% less water, and you cut down on transportation costs because you move them closer to urban centers. You can have them where the people are, so then you're not having this situation where you can't find enough young people to work in agriculture. And the jobs are better, and you can control. So when climate catastrophes happen, it doesn't wipe out the agriculture. There's no famine. And this is something that we need to start seeing around the world. And why do I bring stuff like this up? To show that there is technology out there. There are different approaches we can be taken to how we approach agriculture, but we don't do that because that would require a shift and an investment that, like, the short-term thinking that rules the way that capitalism works just does not account for. It is not logical for us to not be taking these steps. And I know that there has been some move towards vertical greenhouses in places like BC. There's some in Ontario. You know, I get my arugula grown from a vertical greenhouse. But it's not very common, you know, and you can grow anything. You don't have to fly stuff from around the world. You can grow anything right here in Canada with this technology. And it would be, if you power it with renewable technologies, there is no real environmental damage by it. You use less water and you get more food. I mean, it seems like a slam dunk.
I think the only way to implement stuff like that, though, is to nationalize those industries,
Absolutely.
right? You can't kind of piecemeal that. And although,
No.
you know, a cooperative would be great to initiate these kinds of ideas to address food insecurity, because asking Loblaws and Metro and whoever else was there to simply lower their profit margins is not going to fix Canadian food insecurity. Sure, it's not going to fix global food insecurity. But yeah, like, there are so many other ideas that you could implement. And then once you remove the profitization of those kind of industries, and I think a lot of people don't understand what removing profit means. It doesn't mean like the people working within those industries stop getting paid, or they stop investing in innovation or investing in expansion. It means like no excess profitization, right? There's no...
Yeah.
And then you have the ability to make things with price control, where you take a hit somewhere else and make sure that people have their essential goods. There's so many options, but asking, one of the solutions that's like a theme that's presented throughout the hearings also is like a agreement that's made amongst all of the top grocers. And of course, it has to include Walmart and Amazon. So Loblaws and all those were allowed to point fingers at all the things that I listed, but also their competitors, right? You didn't, you know, how come Walmart's not in here answering to this? So it seemed all the parties somewhat agreed on like a bill of rights for consumers that would require a certain amount of transparency over the profit margins and the fees that are levied to farmers and the businesses that are the vendors that are supplying the grocery chains. Is that going to be similar to like a passenger bill of rights that has done nothing for travelers? Like, all of these Band-Aid solutions are just so much wasted energy and effort. You know what I mean? And I'm really also disappointed that, you know, you're able to sit and offer a solution. Anybody who sits for a few minutes can come up with various policy ideas that could work to address this, other than begging oligarchs to make a little less money, which is essentially what Jagmeet sat there and did. But he never offered a solution. He challenged them and he wanted really good sound bites for social media, and he probably got them. Arguably, the cons got better ones. But he didn't offer anybody a solution. What kind of leader or somebody that has that moment in front of everybody who's asking what is happening with our grocery prices and does not offer one solution, even if it's not smash capitalism, something.
But that's the problem with it being privatized, right? Is that they have to be trying to like beg for change from these people instead of just implementing it as government policy. If it was nationalized.
Well, they could do price controls. Like, that is within their means to do price controls, not ideologically, because free market. Okay, here's an answer for all those people that say you can't do that because we live in a free market. Like, our audience might not respond with that, but I'm sure they've heard that. Government intervenes on the side of capital every single day. It's not a free market. They're free from a lot of restrictions, but, that's a complete misnomer. Our federal government absolutely can institute price controls. They don't need to go and beg these folks for their books. You want to see the books? Charlie Angus this morning, he's calling to see the books of paper mills or, in Ontario, a particular company he's worried about. You want to see those books? Talk about nationalizing them, bringing them under public control, because otherwise this is just all wasted effort.
No, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that this is so much more than a right now issue. This is like a deeply rooted issue. And the concern is we got a climate catastrophe on its way. Well, it's already here, but you know what I mean. Things are only going to be getting worse. And it's too late for making little changes. And I'm not just talking about climate here. I'm also talking about how we approach agriculture and food. It is only going to be getting worse with Canadians having less and less money to spend on this. And when people don't have enough to eat en masse, society will see turmoil like it hasn't seen in Canada for a very long time. There is no alternative here. There's no keeping things how they are. Something will be forced to change. It will not just stay the way it is. Something will be forced to change with how we're seeing things go. And so they either can be in control of that, or it can be chaos, and I don't know what would come from that. We need to start proposing long-term solutions. We need to have long-term approaches. We have seen this coming for decades. Anybody who knows anything, any economist who is worth it would have seen this coming decades away. So why haven't we done anything about it? Why have we been so consistently passive with the most basic fundamental of needs for Canadians? Because it's like right now, what exactly, like conservatives love to like that patriotic sense of pride, what exactly are we doing well? Our healthcare is collapsing. Nobody can afford a place to live. We can't afford food. Education is crap. What exactly is left in Canadian society to say that this is a country that is doing in any way well? I need one thing that we're doing well, because I don't see a single goddamn thing anymore. It's consistently across the board. Every single one of our basic needs has been stripped. Every single one of them. There's nothing left. So I don't know what we have. And how are we not in the streets about this? I think it's time that people get pissed off about this, because they have nothing.
I was just going to say, how sad is it that we are in such a state with the expansive amount of farmland that we have at our disposal, the amount of wealth that we have, resources, and right now our solution is it's essentially an inquiry. We do this a lot. We acknowledge a really, really, really big problem. We spend all kinds of time talking about it. I mean, it was just kind of ironic because we're on a podcast talking about it, and then we do nothing. But we appear to be doing something. And that's the most dangerous thing. Even from the opening statements there from that Conservative MP, these folks are in there talking a really good game. I think one thing that we did accomplish, I don't even know who I mean by we, but one thing that was accomplished is the demonization of oligarchs to a degree. Galen Weston was able to get up there and say, I really think about the people that struggle for food often. No, you don't. No, you don't. And I think that was pretty apparent to everybody watching, and even conservatives are using those talking points. I think much of Canada right now is starting to look at that upper class in a new way, in a way that they realize they are being exploited and that their gains come at their expenses. And now, because there's nobody who doesn't grocery shop, that's a very small class of people who don't know what their grocery bill is, right? And everyone is feeling that it's astronomical what's happened there. And that's our food. That's not extra. That's not something you can budget away so that maybe some people aren't feeling this hit. That's everybody. And we have pointed at capital without saying the right words. Everybody is, in fact, pointing in the right direction, which is up, and not using this as a time to kind of divide the working class on an issue.
I'm not going to give too much credit because I don't think it's everyone, because I do see, like, I see stuff on, like, Six Buzz, because Six Buzz is a garbage place, where people...
Why are you watching that trash?
Well, because I got to keep tabs on
Sure.
the public discourse in the city. But, people point to, they'll say, oh, it's the liberals causing this inflation, which is causing this, like some people are pointing in the wrong direction. They're falling for like it's Trudeau is destroying the country. It's like, well, I mean,
You're right.
It's more than that.
There were digs at the government, rightly so, though. That's still in the right direction. You have 8 years of government, and all the levels of government have had their time in the sun to do something about it, and not one of them has. But I would like to talk about
this. Of the free market. That's the thing. They think it's like, oh, our market's not free enough, and this is why. Like, I do see that. So I don't want to be too hopeful. It is a thing.
Why? Why can't we be too hopeful, Santiago? We're talking about food scarcity here.
Because you gotta know it so that I can be like, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. Well, not like that, but you know what I mean. I mean, I guess a question I do want to ask, because we're blueprints of disruption, is, until we start seeing change here, and what do we do on a community level? Like, what do we do with people hungry? I have a few answers, but like, I think that's something that we need to start tackling. I'm a big believer in food related activism. I think that is an important thing.
I think, cooperative solutions are always needed in the immediate, but that's not true. I was going to say that isn't a long-term solution. However, a real socialist society would employ cooperative means locally to get things done. And we don't need farming done on the industrial scale that we do it. Actually, that is quite harmful. So finding the means to produce food in a greener, more local way would certainly go to not just ending food scarcity, but it's a form of climate justice as well. The carbon, one clip that I did cut out, I should have known. I feel duped by that MP. I think that's why it didn't sit well with me. And I was like, for that moment, I thought she was speaking good things, and she was. But there was a moment there where she goes on a real nationalist kind of perspective, where it was about Canadian farmers that Loblaws were screwing, and that only Canadian farmers can grow the produce that we need in a clean way. And it was, I didn't like that bit of it. It obviously didn't sit with me, being an anti-nationalist, and just the way she used foreign should have been a red flag, enough for me to edit it out, right? So the reality is there needs to be import and export, and that has a heavy carbon footprint. So like reducing that need and whatnot is something we can definitely start now without having to wait for the nationalization of the grocery chains.
Yeah, because like I mean, I don't believe that it's like, oh, our Canadian farmers we need because superior cleanliness. Like I'm not buying that, but I do think that a country as big as Canada, with as much agricultural space as we have, should be relying less on imports. And I mean, it's not that much. 70% of our food is grown domestically. So that means 30, isn't it? And that 30, I mean, that's not a small amount for a country of our size.
Well, we import really unnecessary things too. If you look at your labels, like occasionally, like I've had someone bring over a cake that was from Italy, a cake. We do.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm
it was
guilty.
good.
I'm just gonna say that right there. I buy my fair share of things from Italy. Like
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to attack you that way.
I mean, no.
I mean, I ate the
just-
cake, but I look at it and I think of all those comments when people go to Cuba, and I've gone grocery shopping in Cuba. And yes, I understand the memes where, you know, there's one kind of beans, there's one kind of rice, there's one kind of jam, if you can find jam, I'll be honest, right? So we produce and distribute our food because of this competition that we think is so fucking healthy for the economy in the most horribly wasteful and inappropriate ways.
I am curious though, like speaking of Italy, they do agriculture in a very different way that we do that's quite fascinating to me, you know? I mean, first of all, cooperatives, nowhere in the world are co-ops stronger agriculturally than Italy, I think.
Isn't that funny? Because they essentially just elected a fascist.
Yeah, but
What's
you
going
know,
on there?
Italy has quite a duality to it. Let me put it that way. I'm not gonna say they elected a fascist. They got not. No, Italy has a lot. Like I'd say, even with a fascist government, in many ways, Italy is more progressive than Canada, which is nuts to say. But their agriculture is quite cooperative. You know, the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, which is a place where a lot of food products come from. It's the most cooperative place in the world. I think something like 2/3 of workers in that region belong to co-ops, something like that. I mean, it's a huge number, and like, you know, they have a lot of protections as to like the quality of their food and the quality of the ingredient, you know, the whole like DOP label and stuff, and they somehow managed to get like really high quality stuff for affordable levels for people. You know, I think it's something I don't know enough about, but sure there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there to learn from.
Well, I think it opens up the larger discussion of cooperatives as a solution. Farmers use them quite often. You actually had a little funny story about Loblaws and its origins. You know, when we were talking about the Ontario, I'm going to get the United Farmers of Ontario, UFO.
So this is a future episode in the making, because I just recently discovered that there was a party called the United Farmers of Ontario who like did crazy good in like 1914. And apparently like they were trying to create some cooperative food chain in Canada, in Ontario, like a cooperative grocery store chain. And they brought in some guy with the last name Loblaw. I forget his first name, but he was one of like the...
Was it Bob? Bob Loblaw?
It might have been Tim or something. I don't know. It's a Loblaw. They brought one of the Loblaw.
Clearly you haven't seen Arrested Development. That joke fell flat on you. I hope someone out there is laughing.
I have not seen Arrested. I saw an episode and I was like, I can't.
Just stop before we're not friends anymore.
But and so they brought this Loblaw guy in to help with that, and then I think he ended up leaving and starting his own chain that became Loblaws, and that's that story, which is really deeply depressing when you think of what we could have had instead of what we did get. That's
why I thought of it, and they actually became something, like whatever that cooperative part of it became. It morphed into something else that is still existent, but obviously in different form. But I know you wanted to do like an entire episode on that, but it keeps coming into this conversation for me also because of the way we need to represent that part. And when I say we, I think I'm figuring progressives, the left, so I need to appeal to farmers in the way that the conservatives are.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Farmers are historically cooperative beings. It's required. You know, we all are. But I mean, if farms can't exist on their own, essentially in communities, they have to be within communities, and they work with each other as farmers. This is a very socialist ideal, but it's not producing that way. You know, it's not producing the result that we want in that way. And I don't know. We need somebody to speak to that, I think.
So just to like give a little background, and like I said, we're going to do a whole episode on this at some point, and we're still learning, so I don't know as much as I want to know about this. But so the United Farmers of Ontario was a party back in 1914 that ran only in rural seats. They ran something like 55 seats and 154 seats in Ontario, and they had an agreement with Labour parties that Labour would run in urban centres, and the UFO party would run in rural areas. And so they entirely focused on issues related to farmers. And they also had a sector outside of the electoral sphere called the United Farmers Cooperative of Ontario, something like that. Something Cooperative for United Farmers Ontario, all that words jumbled. Anyways, it's a very different idea than what we have now. Parties, when they run everywhere, unless you're talking about the Bloc Québécois.
How can you represent everyone?
Exactly. And I've long spoke about how we don't have nearly enough parties in Canada. I come from a country, Colombia, where, like, for example, the current government, Pacto Histórico, is a coalition of like 6-7 parties, and every single candidate has like 6-7 parties behind them, like it's a country where we have a lot of coalitions, because instead of like having everybody try to agree in one big thing, it's better to have people who actually like represent the various interests and have coalitions built out of that, because the interests of urban and rural Canada, Ontario, they're different. Not necessarily against each other, but they need space to advocate for their own things. And so I do think that like a model like that with more parties and more coalitions and more collaboration, I think that's a lot healthier form of democracy than what we have. And it's very clear that the NDP doesn't know what the fuck they're doing when it comes to rural anywhere. They don't. And like I said, I'm from Colombia. In South America, rural areas are where socialists win first. It's completely different here.
It should be. Yeah, we have completely failed at capturing that rural vote. Somehow that is conservative country, and it's not faring well. I just want to bring it back to the hearings, and some of the issues it brought up as well was like the monopoly on, we're talking about cooperative local things, which is the complete opposite of what we have right now, is this huge monopoly on our food systems. How have we developed a system that we think it's okay that there are so few people? So we're talking essentially about the boardrooms of these 3 companies, plus the American ones that they mentioned, Amazon, Walmart, and whatever. They get to decide what our food will cost, what food will be available to us, how much farmers will get for their food.
It's important to mention for people that, just in case people still believe in the whole thing of supply and demand does not apply to 2 situations: essential goods and monopolies, right? So when in an essential good, people will pay anything to have it because they need it.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing that we're seeing with housing, right? You need it, so there is no like, oh, I'll go get it. So, like, you pay anything. And when you add a monopoly to that situation, and monopolies can charge anything, you end up in the situation we have now.
We're hostage.
And there's nothing capitalism has to fix that. That is the free market. The free market is monopolies controlling essential goods. That is the free market, and there is no way that society can survive that kind of system. No way. Maybe a few people will survive, but increasingly smaller amount of people will survive, and most of us will be absolutely screwed.
And you're right about all the issues that food insecurity brings up about our need to address the agricultural and just how we structure that. But those CEOs were right in a way where they brought up all of those other issues that are playing into the fact that we can't afford our groceries and why groceries are so high. Like, they weren't entirely lying. Like, they had the same fuel cost increase, although the cons blame the carbon tax. All of their other products have gone up. We should demand that the cost of their labor goes up. Yes, war does cost money and disrupts the supply chain. It's unnecessary. And the Canadian government raising interest rates over and over again. And so those people who do have a mortgage out there are struggling to pay those bills as well. That might not be a priority over folks in the unhoused community, but it's still contributing to this inability of folks to spend their money in places that actually stimulate the economy as well. This is going to turn into a big disaster economically as well as on the individual level.
So that right there is also when I say stuff like, taking care of everybody is good for everybody. That applies for the richest Canadians too. Eventually, if you keep bleeding everyone dry and screwing everyone over, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. Because you need those people to exploit,
economically, but also spiritually. Like, maybe not them. Like, I'm not speaking to the 1%. I have no idea what their lived experience is. Fuck them. But we also mean it in that holistic way, where we do better when everyone around us does better. Because the other day you talked about something like this feeling that just emanates in these tough times, like where you called it like this kind of like dimming or just this negative energy that you seem to be able to feel on people, right? Like, yes, it's an economic argument, but it's definitely a well-being. Your own well-being is absolutely dependent on the health and vibrancy of the community around you, right? And these oligarchs, they don't get that. They are so isolated. I don't think they feel those feelings that you were talking about the other day.
Like that's the thing, right? Is that at the end of the day, look, like we need to rethink, like it's an entire, like it's more than an economic thing. It's a cultural thing. Right? It's about our Canadian culture. And that might be scary to some people, but we like if we have a culture of rugged individualism and of isolation and of atomization and transactionalizing every single relationship and commodifying culture itself and all of these things, you're left with a very cold society that doesn't look after each other and where everybody has a little bit of suffering. And maybe when everybody has that little bit of suffering, you become a little bit numb to it and you don't realize it as much, but it's there, and you, like, for society to function, you need to look after everyone. I mean, sure, there was the days of feudalism where, most people would suffer and the richest, they were such a small amount of number that they could still like prosper, but it doesn't quite work the same in this society anymore. Like, we do need to look after people more. And either way, like, that's what we should be doing. Like,
it didn't really work back then either. Eventually some of those lords lost their heads.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly it, right? Eventually, that's the eventuality here is that, like,
figuratively speaking, of course. For legal reasons.
For legal reasons. But, like, the eventuality is that, like, people will not tolerate that. They will eventually not. So, like, do we want to let it get to that point? Where
a bread riot, there needs to be a spark. And I hate having to say that sometimes it has to get worse before it'll get better. But the reality is, like Alejandra said in our last episode, even the housing crisis starting to hit more than just the lower class. And again, that's terminology of capitalists, but you understand what we mean.
I hear people talk about like landlords struggling, and it pisses me off. But like I am starting to they are starting to be. Like, it's starting to be a situation where it's not.
I'm not going to feel for them. I don't care.
I'm not feeling for them. I'm not feeling for them at all. But what I'm saying is they're starting to realize that like with all of these rising interest rates and everything that forced because of the instability that was created by buying into these systems, that it'll eventually come back and bite them in the ass too, that they are making maximum short-term profit, but in the long term, you cannot keep making that money. So it's about short-term, long-term. All of it comes back to short-term, long-term. You can exploit people in the short term, but you will never make it work in the long term. So let's start thinking about what we want to do in the long term. What do we want things to look like in 15 years? And that's the thing that capitalism sucks at asking itself, because it's about right now,
So does electoral politics. Those politicians don't give a shit about 15 years from now. They also operate in these very short cycles, even shorter budget cycles. And that's how they think, because all of those speakers that we had over the almost 2 hours, none of them spoke long term. And even someone brought up the increase in food prices and said in the past year. They would only acknowledge that food has gone up in the past year, and not that, the cost of everything has gone up far faster than our wages. Not just housing and education, but our food and everything else that we need to literally function and survive. Like, just breathe and survive, just to get physically through the day. And it's shocking to me that more people aren't questioning the system under these conditions. But that's what we're here for. We are hoping that, these discussions do help people to start to look beyond the individuals. We talked about leadership cults, and this kind of plays into that too. Like, look beyond the Galen Westons, but the system that he thrives on. Look beyond Jagmeet and Trudeau and Pierre for answers or leadership, on this matter, because we're not going to get it there either. Clearly, they had their chance, and it was just really mostly rhetoric and no solutions. So clearly more.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like what I said in the leadership cult episode, there's no shortage. There's not a finite supply of Galen Westons. There's always going to be another Galen Weston. There's always another CEO who's going to exploit people, because the system is designed to create them. Those are the people who get elected by shareholders into those positions, right?
And are then obligated to provide profits to those shareholders.
And if they don't, what's going to happen? What's going to happen if they don't provide those profits to shareholders? They're out, and they get replaced by somebody who will.
Absolutely.
So they're always going to be that person in that position until we change the system. And because who are the shareholders? 0.1% in Canada control 25% of all shares. 1% control 50, top 10% control 90% of all shares, meaning
once you start looking at the boards of all of these really big places, it's frightening, the crossover, and former politicians are certainly amongst.
You know who's the biggest shareholders in all of the banks? Other banks. They all own each other. It's hilarious. If you actually look at the share distribution, all of the big banks in Canada own each other. It's actually hilarious. Like, there is no difference between them. They are all one big super bank that has made themselves look like a variety of banks. And that comes into you know what tricks people all the time is, we all know monopolies are evil, but people fail to recognize duopolies, right? Because the illusion of choice is a powerful thing.
I was going to say there are no duopolies. You don't think those people are meeting? I have sat.
No, they are.
Yeah,
they are.
Same
but
with
it's
the
that
natural gas.
Illusion of choice, right?
Yeah.
Coke, Pepsi. What do you like better? Coke and Pepsi own all the other sodas. You like Crush, you like Fanta, you like 7-Up, you like Sprite. And it's the same for all food. You go and you look, people talk about the abundance of choice in capitalism. Bullshit. Go look at the grocery store. There's 6 companies that make 80% of the things in your grocery store.
And those 6 companies collude with one another.
Exactly.
They do not operate really in some vacuum.
Yeah.
No.
They're actually one company, kind of like the banks.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to absolutely, like, I imagine these three gentlemen met many times before they sat down to testify, many times. And they have probably in the past. And it's the same with all of our industries. There's absolutely tons of mechanisms that are there for them to get together and plot against us. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've sat there listening to gas and oil executives who should be competitors talking about how to thwart environmentalist efforts, on how to create think tanks to put out the propaganda that they need together. So even when you do have more healthy competition, which was suggested as one of the solutions to this food crisis, it's not. More capitalism is never the solution. Breaking it up. Yes, I'm all for breaking up something like that, but into something more that Santiago described, where cooperative local food efforts, where we're not dependent on one or six big companies. Because, even that part is an illusion. So the whole free market is a farce. And I love how we did get to spend a lot of time here smashing capitalism, because that's really what I wanted to see in those hearings. And the way that Jagmeet hyped it up on social media, and he was going to destroy them, and rather he'd tear down the system. I mean, I've given up on that a long time ago, but either way, if he wasn't going to talk about it, we were. So,
I mean, I guarantee that this was a lot more productive of a conversation than anything that happened at hearings, and I haven't even seen a lot of it. I've only seen a few clips.
Spare yourself. I mean, I watched it for research purposes, but hopefully folks will share this episode and hear a whole different messaging around that. But I've seen a lot of good content creators challenging what we saw, and I'm hoping a lot of people aren't buying it. Just like COVID kind of shed light on how capitalism has failed us, especially in emergencies. And this is just another example on we do not have the system that is best for us.
Like COVID, I just want to end up saying that crisis was tiny in compared to what's coming next. The what we're going to see.
You mean the climate crisis?
The climate crisis. The food problems we're going to see from the climate crisis, the interruption to distribution chains.
They're all
and
connected,
the wars
right?
And just wait. So we either do something now or we suffer. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to end on a good note, because we do try to do that. And that was super doomsday, Santiago. But I mean, I know we got to go there. But here's just a small little tidbit. I read a book to my son, and at the end of the book, it talks about speaking up and telling the world how you will make it better. And every time we get there, I ask him, so how would you make the world better? And sometimes I get really immediate answers, like on his day, like I would have eaten more cake. I don't think I've actually gotten that, but something like that. But last night he's like, we've got to get rid of rich people. And so that was actually our last conversation before we both drifted off to sleep. Was me kind of snickering, and he's clearly absorbing. Like, he doesn't listen to the podcast, but, he does live with me. So, yeah.
Based.
I'm indoctrinating my littles. Deal with it. That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Helou Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.